it's Ash from Super Videos back for another video. This is going to be a mixed video. We're going to be looking at The Walking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead and looking at the Whispers. And we're going to discuss how the Whispers can be introduced in the series. Now there's a bunch of ways that they could actually go about doing this and introducing the Whispers. Some of which I actually like and some I don't like because I don't think it's going to work. And we're going to discuss all of those possibilities that they could end up using to introduce the Whispers. So the first way would be just to do it the same way as it was done in the comics and just remix it a little bit. So something along the lines of just introducing them exactly like they did before, but giving us like a tease at the end of the war. So for example, maybe at the end of the war, when the war is done, maybe an after credit scene where we see a bunch of walkers and the camera zooms in and just pans through the walkers, and maybe the last walker we see before the screen goes to black is a walker that looks a bit different. Maybe it's very subtle, but it looks a bit different. And maybe even for non-comic readers, they wouldn't even notice anything and they would just think that this is a tease at the next season because the next season is going to involve another herd coming in, just like No Way Out or something along those lines. But for comic readers, we would kind of know, or we may even see it if we look closely, that last walker looks very different and it may be a whisper. That way it doesn't take away from the Whispers introduction in the show because it would be just like the comics. We would just get a slight tease at it. And if you think about it, we kind of got a tease at the Whispers even though it wasn't really the Whispers. So in 706, the walkers that Tara and Heath came upon looked a lot like the Whispers. Of course they weren't. But in my opinion, that was a tease because I think they made those walkers look like the Whispers. Obviously, it was because they were covered in sand and they were in sand and everything, so there was a reason for it. But in my opinion, the writers did that on purpose to give us a tease at the Whispers. So we've already kind of got a tease, so I don't even know if we need a tease, but if they were gonna do a tease, in my opinion, it would need to be an after credit scene, something along the lines of what I just explained. Now that's if they want to tackle this just like they did it in the comics and basically bring it to life exactly as it was in the comics with some remixed version of getting a tease out of the Whispers before we see them officially. Now the next possibility the Whispers can potentially be introduced is through Fear the Walking Dead. So obviously we've seen a lot of not only teases but little seeds here and there about Nick and the members of the family in Fear the Walking Dead and also Luciana and everyone using the same tactics as the Whispers, covering themselves in blood, walking through the walkers, and even Nick teaching everyone about this strategy. So it seems like they are planting little seeds here and there. So there's definitely a possibility that this is going to happen. Although I don't like this theory and I don't think it's going to work, and I'm going to explain why, but I'm not going to dismiss the theory because there is some theory behind it, something behind it that can support the fact that members of Fear the Walking Dead are going to turn into the Whispers. Now, let's start positive. Let's start with what I like about that theory. So what I like about that theory is that it would be a great way to kind of get a backstory about the Whispers, seeing them before they became the Whispers, and maybe even referring back to Fear the Walking Dead when the Whispers are introduced in The Walking Dead and kind of seeing how they were before and things like that. Now, looking at the negative, there's a lot more negative in my opinion. The first one is that it takes away from the surprise element because the first interaction with the survivors and the Whisperers in the comics was very cool, was very iconic. They were hearing voices, they thought that the walkers were talking. Even for non-comic readers, if you just go into that, it's going to be pretty amazing in the TV show to see something like that, to think that walkers may be talking. So I think that surprise part of it and that aspect of just seeing it for the first time and knowing that it's the first interaction and looking at it like that, there's something cool about that. I really like that. I want them to do something like that. So I don't want to see the Whispers before they're introduced. So in my opinion, that takes away from the surprise element. And the freshness of it, seeing the Whispers for the first time, hearing them talk for the first time. Then the second negative I have with it is that with the way the Whispers are, we can't say that anyone from the Fear the Walking Dead show, Nick, Travis, Madison, Alicia, or anyone else, is going to become the leaders, become Alpha, become Lydia, become Beta. In my opinion, that just doesn't work. There's a lot of things that are not matching up with those characters. Now, of course, you can make the case that these characters that I just mentioned, like Travis, like Nick, like Madison, like Alicia, they're gonna progress and slowly become the Whispers. You can make that case, but in my opinion, they just don't match. And if Nick and the others are gonna become the Whispers, they're gonna need to become some members of the Whispers, not necessarily the leaders. And when that happens, because they spent so much time with their backstory and everything, they're gonna have to become a central part of the Whispers and that story arc. And if they're gonna do that, they're gonna have to change the story. They're gonna have to remix this story. And if they remix the story, I'm afraid we may not get the actual story from the comics. And they may deviate from the source material from the comic book to an extent that it just wouldn't feel the same. It would feel like they're taking away some things that I really want to see. So that's the second negative. The third negative is that it somehow humanizes the Whispers. So whatever they do to make Nick and the others turn into the Whispers, it humanizes the Whispers to an extent. And I just don't think that we need the Whispers to be humanized. They're not the type of character that you want to humanize. So because of that, I just don't think that there's any correlation between Fear the Walking Dead and the Whispers. And I just don't see them making it so that Fear the Walking Dead is gonna transition into the characters becoming Whispers. So that's the second possibility. The third possibility is the Scavengers. So in the TV show, the Heapsters or the Scavengers becoming the Whispers. Now, although I do see some similarities between Jadis and Alpha, especially with the way she looks and especially with the way that the Whispers function and the way they are and the way the Scavengers are, being very closed off, being very distant from reality and everything like that, and how both of these communities use walkers as a defense mechanism. Of course, for the Whispers, they're basically dressing up themselves as the Whispers, and the Scavengers are using walkers just like Winslow, who attacked Rick. So there is some sort of similarity between these two groups, and they could potentially make the Scavengers become the Whispers. But in my opinion, there's also a lot of the piece of the puzzle that's just not there for the Scavengers to become the Whispers. The Whispers are more about family. Even though there's a small portion of the Whispers that are like that, we don't see anything like that in the Scavengers. We don't see Jadis being that attached to anyone within the Scavenger community or anything along those lines. So because of that, I think if they are going to go that route and have the Scavengers become the Whispers, they are going to need to plant seeds more and more, and they're going to need to make the Scavengers transition into the Whispers pretty quickly. And also, the problem with it is that, again, it takes away from the surprise element. Seeing the Whispers like that in the comics was very cool. If you're going to do it so that the Scavengers turn into the Whispers, it just takes away from that surprise element, that freshness of it. So because of that, in my opinion, it just wouldn't work. And also, in the comics, when the Whisperers came into the story, Negan didn't have any contact with them. And because of that, there was some cool storyline between the Whisperers and Negan. In the TV show, they may not be able to do that, because obviously Jadis knows about Negan. And they had their first contact already in the finale of season 7. So, due to these factors, I just don't see the Scavengers becoming the Whispers. Now, the last possibility is something that someone in the comment section said a couple months ago. I should have wrote their name. I forgot. If it's you, let me know in the comment section below. They said something along the lines of they could actually make it so that Morgan is the thing that connects the Whisperers to the story, or some kind of backstory for the Whisperers, or something along those lines. Because if you remember, back in season 3, in the episode Clear, I think it was episode 12, when Rick and the others went to Morgan's little compound, little building, and Morgan was just crazy. He was insane. He was just saying all this nonsense. He said something that was very interesting. He said he sees people wearing dead people's faces. Now, that could be a clear hint that Morgan came into contact with the Whisperers and saw them. And so it would be very cool if they're gonna go that route and have that be the case and have the Whisperers be the people who came into contact with Morgan at that period of time. Now there's a couple things that don't line up here because obviously where Morgan was in that episode was very far away and it was still very early on during the apocalypse, I would say. So for the Whisperers to be progressed into what they were at that period of time, it may not necessarily work. Now you could make the case that at that time the Whisperers weren't as ruthless as they are now, they weren't as big. You could make that case, definitely. But in my opinion, the distance doesn't really work. And also, like I said, being pretty early on during the outbreak and everything like that, it doesn't really make sense for the Whisperers to be that progressed to beat the Whisperers at that time. But you could also look at it from another perspective. You could also say that, yeah, because it was so far away, that's why we haven't came into contact with them again. And maybe that connects to the whole boundary situation with the Whisperers. Maybe the boundary that the Whisperers have is somewhere in the middle of that, somewhere between where Morgan was in Clear and where Alexandria is. And because it's so far away, that's why they haven't come into contact with them again. And maybe somehow they could be going back into that location or going there, maybe to get guns for the war, even though it's unlikely because it's so far away, or something along those lines, where they may actually go there. And that may bring up the whole seeing the Whisperers and hearing their voices and the whole thing with the boundary and everything. And what could also add to that is Morgan himself, because we do know Morgan tends to go crazy a lot. He's still not completely there. So what if Morgan tells Rick he can go back and get guns? He doesn't know how long the war is going to be. He thinks it's going to be a pretty big war. So Morgan may say to Rick that he's going to go back to that location to get the weapons. And maybe he goes with a couple people or something like that. And maybe that's when Morgan hears the walkers talking and their voices and everything. And when he comes back to tell Rick about it, Rick doesn't trust them because Rick thinks that Morgan is still crazy and everything. And Morgan could be like, I'm not saying this because I'm crazy, I actually heard them. And maybe nobody would believe him. So that could be a cool way for them to kind of remix this story there as well. And that's basically it for what I think how the Whisperers could be introduced. I want to know your opinions about this. How do you think the Whisperers can be introduced? Do you want them to be introduced just like they were in the comics? Do you want them to be introduced the same way but have a little tease like I said? Or do you want them to be introduced by linking their story to Fear the Walking Dead? Or the Scavengers? Or like I said with Morgan and everything. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. I'll be back for another video.